director, composer. I work in the arts. And in 2017, on my way home from work, I had a very serious accident. But just to go back a little bit before I speak about what actually happened, I've worked in the arts my whole life and have loved my career. I love what I do. I love the fact that I get to live a very sort of varied life. I choose things that I want to do very carefully, and I always have. But through my 20s and certainly early 30s, I found myself prioritizing the wrong thing and chasing the wrong thing, like a lot of young people do, and chasing money and other things, and just not really living my purpose. Even though I was doing things that brought me joy, I felt like I was coasting and drifting and getting sick all the time. And I now see that it's because I wasn't quite living my path, as it were. And I had a series of years of glandular fever before my accident, which is the Epstein-Barr virus. Excuse me. And I had during about a year before the accident, for about a year, I had glandular fever, and it was very severe. Every time I had it, it would last between 6 months and a year, and it would just completely floor me and debilitate me. And I was struggling with it for about a year leading up to the accident. And because I had no sense of self-care, I was so disconnected to myself and my body, and I put all these defenses up. I was just working all the way through it, and I was so unwell, and I was texting friends from work saying, I've gone green, I think I'm going to pass out. I was that unwell, but just pushed myself through it like a Trojan without thinking about my health. And on the 28th of March 2017, I was sitting in a restaurant with a friend of mine, and I was so unwell that I was just crying because I could barely hold my head up. And I was just streaming and crying. And I just said, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. He said, I know. Can you take a little bit of time off? Can you tell the people at work that you just need a bit of time, maybe a few weeks, maybe even a few months, just to rest and take stock and recoup and find yourself again? And I said, yeah, probably, but I'm so stubborn. I'm not sure how much I would have heeded that advice. And the following day I went to work. I did tell them that I was going to take some time out, and they were completely fine. But I was thinking to myself, well, how much do I really need, And that night then the accident happened. So what happened was I'd come home from work, and I planned to make a curry. I'm South Asian, with a friend that evening who used to live with me, but she got moved out to get married, so still lived across the road from me. And I'd come home, and she'd known I'd been ill. I'd come home and my phone had lost its battery. So I just texted her saying, I've got no battery left in my phone. I still want to do our evening. I'm not feeling great, but I still want to do our evening. If you can help me chop, because that takes 2 hours to chop all the ingredients, we can still have our evening. No problem at all. I left the phone on the table, walked to my local shop next door to buy the groceries, a few doors down to buy the groceries. It's about 6 o'clock in the evening, and I filled my basket up and I went to pay. And as I was going to pay, I saw that the queue was extending outside the shop, and this was the end of March. It wasn't Christmas, it wasn't Easter. We lived in a Jewish area, there was no Jewish festival. So I was perplexed, and I thought, I've got no phone to text my friend that I'm stuck in the queue. She knows I've been unwell, so she's going to be worried that I'm passed out on the floor somewhere if she's ringing the bell and I'm not there. So I just said to the cashiers, I just need to go and tell my friend that I'm just going to be a little bit later than planned. So I put the basket on the counter and walked out, and I thought I would be able to see her walking down the road to my flat, to my home. I didn't see her, and there was a bus stop obscuring my view, which I knew, but I just thought to myself that I could see through it, and I could see through it. It was daytime. I walked a bit further, still couldn't see her, walked towards the edge of the pavement, put my arm in the air to wave to her in the hope that she'd see me with my arm in the air. I'd signal that I was in the shop, and that would be that. I put my toes over the edge, and as I did, a bus came careening in, and I hadn't seen the bus before that. I didn't know there was a bus coming in. It came shooting in, caught the edge of my boot, and dragged my lower leg and foot underneath the wheel of the bus. And I was dragged. I saw it happening almost in slow motion, and I remember thinking to myself, how much of me and how much of my leg is this bus going to take, I think I'm dead. So at that moment, there were several realities happening simultaneously. The first one was that I still so strongly remember myself I felt like I was still standing up. You know, I had been dragged into the bus, I was on the floor, my leg was being flattened by this bus, and yet, excuse me, I felt my 2 feet firmly on the ground. I felt my wallet and keys in one hand, and I felt my other arm in the air, about to wave to my friend. It was such a strange feeling. I'd obviously, you know, disconnected from myself in multiple ways. And the other reality was obviously I was under the bus. And the third reality was that I'd started to float up and eject my body, which I had, and it was extraordinary. So at that point, the NDE was starting to happen. So I floated up, floated up, floated up. And I felt so wide. And the higher I floated, I could see the top of the red bus. I could see myself under the bus. And the higher I floated, the more the physical world began to fall away. I felt like my wingspan was the whole of London, or my borough, London and back. I felt so wide, so peaceful, formless, full of light, full of love, simply being and beautiful. I could hear my thoughts, everybody's thoughts. I felt like I was tapping into the collective human noise, which actually did fade the higher I went, interestingly. So then I felt like I was surrounded by light, beautiful shards of light all around me. And it looked like sort of shards of light beaming in through a window in the morning. You know, you get those patterns. So shards of light were beaming into my heart from every single direction like a star, and filling it up to the brim with love. And then my heart was taken out of my chest and given a beautiful polish like you get at a car wash, to the point where it was sparkling clean, and I could see this ball of hot light, which I knew was my heart, which had been polished, that was sparkling clean, and then filled up to the brim with love, and light was going into my heart, and then it just put back into my body, well, my sense, as it were. So I knew it was coming back into me, and it was extraordinary. I felt like I was full up to the brim with love, and I knew at that moment that this was not a love that could get depleted, where, you know, you do too much and it's gone. It was a being kind of existential divine love that would constantly stay here. And I knew in that moment that I needed to do all I could, if I were to go back onto the earth, to protect that space so that I could give it as purely as I'd felt it in that moment. And then I heard a voice, and the voice came, it was up and to my right, and it felt like a male voice. So for me, I have no doubt that in my mind it was a divine, it was the source of all creation, so God, essentially. And as I heard the voice, I also saw the words appearing like speech bubbles, and then they'd fade. And the voice said very calmly, "Love is all there is." And then again, give love, give love, give love, because love is all there is. And I felt like the voice was, although it was up and to my right, it was also resounding through every single molecule of my being. I felt like it was, you know, sound has an interesting, sound is very potent, isn't it? And I felt like it was literally bouncing through my essence. So it wasn't me, but it also was me. And I knew in that moment that we are all facets of this beautiful light and this beautiful voice, and we are actually all this love. And at that moment, I had an extraordinary life of you. And I don't know whether any of you have seen the film Beauty and the Beast. I'm a huge Disney fan. So it reminded me of Beauty and the Beast, the scene where the Beast gives Belle his library. So I was in this massive, huge library, this huge room that was sort of lined with books. There were no books in the middle, but it was lined with books. And they were all sort of on the shelves, beautiful, gilt-trimmed, hardback, jewel-coloured books with, you know, gold writing. books that you can blow and you can see the dust coming off. And I knew that they were books, I suppose Akashic records. And I honed into 3 books, a blue one, a green one, and a burgundy one. And I can't say too much about what happened next because I'm saving it for the burgundy book, which is a podcast that I'm doing. There's only a tiny detail that I'm omitting, but I can say this. In the middle of my life review, and I knew that inside those books were memories of my life. In the middle of my life review, I screamed, and the scream hoovered me back into my body like a pipe like this. And straight away I was back into the drama and into the horror. And at that moment, I felt like the scream felt like it lasted, because I was up in that space having my life review when the scream happened. And I remember hearing the scream from up there going, where's that massive animalistic noise coming from? And then, of course, when I was back in my body, I screamed the tail end of that scream. So it's almost like it felt like the scream lasted for hours. Of course, it didn't. It was probably a couple of seconds. But in that time, I was in the middle of my life review, was pulled back, and then I was in my body screaming the end of the scream. And so what had happened was, and I'd seen this as of the moment of impact, there was a man in a white car driving in parallel to the bus. And he had seen what had happened. And so as the bus had come to a stop, because the driver had known that he'd hit me, the white car drove parallel to the bus and then came to a complete stop in front of the bus, in the bus stop. And he swung his door open, leapt out of the car, looked at the bus driver, who was as stunned as I was, or potentially more so, because of course he'd hit somebody, looked at me and screamed, "Go back, you've got someone underneath you." And at this point, I was obviously hugely traumatized. I couldn't quite compute what was going on. I couldn't formulate words because I was full of adrenaline, in shock. But something in my brain said, say what he said. So I then screamed exactly what he said verbatim. "Go back, you've got somebody underneath you." Still not quite realizing that somebody was me. So he screamed a second time. I screamed a second time. He screamed a third time. I screamed a third time. At which point then the bus driver was able to come to his, senses, as it were, and drive back and reverse off me. But I will say this, that just before that had happened, I remember seeing a program, and it was a woman in the States, in the USA, that had a shark attack in the ocean. I don't remember where she was, but it was about 15 years prior to the accident. I'd seen this program. And it's amazing what the brain brings to the forefront of our mind during times of extreme trauma, when one thinks that they're going to die, So in the program, this woman, she recounts her story, and she's in the sea, at sea, and the shark had taken the whole of her leg from sort of her groin, the whole of her leg in its mouth. And she says, "I heard a pop, and I looked down and my leg had gone." And so just before, and I was actually, as I was looking at the white car, I remember this animalistic sort of need to get myself free. So I remember thinking to myself, because I was so panicked, I remember thinking, I don't care if I lose my leg, I just don't want to lose my life. So I tried very hard to pull my foot out, or my leg out, from underneath the bus. Obviously, I would have no chance against a 10-ton bus. But I remember the first time I pulled, I remember thinking, oh, there's movement, because my foot felt like it was, my leg felt like it was flattened like paper, because obviously it was flattened by the wheel of a 10-ton bus. And I thought, oh, there's movement. There was no movement. I was potentially breaking my bones by trying to pull my leg from the bus. So then I tried a second time, going, oh, I can probably get myself free. At which point this shark attack memory came into my mind from this lady. And something said, no, if you try a third time, and I was actually pulling a third time, if you try any more, you will disconnect from your leg. Your leg will be under the bus, and you will most certainly bleed to death. Stop pulling and surrender. So I feel like that memory literally saved my life, because I wasn't in my senses. I had every intention of trying to get my leg out, and I thought I could. So I'm so grateful for that memory, because it literally made me go, just surrender. Just wait for whatever is going to happen, because there is no way that you will win against a bus. So I did, and surrendered. And so it's interesting, once he had reversed off me, as a lot of people that have gone through traumatic experiences like this will potentially say, I was exhilarated. I was massively in shock, could barely breathe, couldn't speak, could barely see. But I was like, oh, great. I didn't want any drama. I work in drama. I didn't want any more drama. So I was like, great, I can now go and pay for my chilies, go and make my dinner, and we can go back to having a nice evening together, myself and my friend having our girly chats tonight. So I leapt up going, it's fine, go back to your day, thanks very much, and I'm all right. Of course I wasn't all right, and then just collapsed on the bench. But interestingly, there was no pain for a few minutes, because I felt like my whole leg was jelly, and I could feel what I can only describe. I mean, I'm not medical, but I can describe them as sort of shock chemicals or something traveling in two directions from my core up to my brain and down to my leg. And I remember thinking, I remember my brain it was almost like it was drowning in shock chemicals. And I could almost feel my brain filling up with liquid, which felt like it was cortisol or adrenaline or something. And I thought, you know what, soon I'll be unable to speak because I'll be drowning in this shock or something. So I just had to, I managed to I couldn't say much, but I managed to say 2 words, my friend. And I said 2 words, and I managed to point towards my flat, towards my home. So I said, my friend. And I just kept saying my friend. I couldn't say any more than that. And the bus driver was like, what do you mean? What do you mean, your friend? What are you saying? And I just kept saying it. I tried to say, she's coming to meet me, but I couldn't find the words because I was so in shock. So I just kept saying my friend. And then an elderly lady, lovely lady, came up to the bus, and she was trying to help me assimilate my language. So she said, are you trying to say that I think she said, are you trying to say that your friend is coming to meet you, or something like that? And I went, yes, my friend. She walked up to my flat. She said, which one? And I managed to say the number of my home. So she walked up to it, came back, and she went, there's no friend. There's no one there. And I knew she'd be there. Potentially she was late, but I knew she'd be there. So I just kept saying it. And the bus driver went, look, I'll go. So he walked up to my flat, ran up to my flat, obviously, because it was an emergency. And she was just approaching at that point. And he said to her, and she tells me the story, he said to her, are you about to meet your friend? Is she petite, dark, with dark hair and glasses on and glasses? And she said, yeah. He said, I've run her over. And she came running towards me, and I've never seen somebody with eyes so wide in my life. And I remember her worry as she ran towards me. And at that point I went, oh, it's serious, because nobody wants to feel like they've caused a drama or there's an emergency. People just want to get on with their lives, and I did, So of course I was taken to hospital, but I was sent home that night with no injuries, which was the strangest thing. So I then had to investigate that and make a huge complaint because for 5 weeks I wasn't treated. So I was sent home with no injuries, but of course I had in excess of 32 pieces of bone floating around my leg and my foot, plus the arch ligament had collapsed. There were many dislocations. My leg and my foot were a complete write-off. And I knew this, but I was so in shock that part of me was like, I just want to get home. I'd booked a new singing student to come to my home to teach the following day. And I was saying to my friend in the A&E department, I hope I can still teach her. I hope I can still do it. She was like, yeah, of course you can. You can do it from the sofa. You can still do it. And I was saying this through tears because by this point the pain was kicking in and I was feeling agonizingly, it was agonizingly painful. So when the doctor came out and said, oh, you're fine, it's just soft tissue damage, it'll be completely fine, in 10 days you'll be walking again. I'm still not walking 5 years later. In 10 days you'll be walking again. I was exhilarated. I was like, okay, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just like some kind of sprain or something, So He did give me crutches though, so luckily I was able to get home. And the following morning, actually, in fact, because I was so traumatized, I woke up 3 times that night feeling like I was having a heart attack. And I've never felt panic attacks, like a panic experience like that before in my life. But I literally went, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. 3 times that night. And in between those 3 times, I dreamt of a burning building. So obviously I was traumatized. I didn't dream of a bus crashing or being under the bus. I dreamt of a burning building. So clearly my brain was trying very hard to make sense of what was going on. And then through the next few months and year, I dreamt a lot of burning buildings. Never vehicles crashing, interestingly, burning buildings. I don't know what the significance was, but all I can think of was my brain was trying to find a way to understand without giving me the actual event itself. Maybe it was too painful to see it. So I woke up. I remember waking up at 5 o'clock that morning after having slept maybe 2 hours. And I woke up and I looked at my leg, and it was the size of a boulder. I mean, it was at least 3 times the size that it was. And I was in absolute agony. I cannot explain to you how much. I didn't think that amount of pain was possible, having, now I know, having that many pieces floating around my leg, and ligament damage and nerve damage and ligaments ruptured and dislocations and all sorts, and whiplash and all sorts of things. And I remember going, oh, I don't know what to do, but he said it was okay. He said, I'm going to be okay. So I just need to believe that and trust that in 10 days I'll be walking again, And those 5 weeks, I have to say, were absolutely horrific, because I didn't have any painkillers, because of course they didn't give me any morphine because they thought it was soft tissue damage. They can't prescribe strong painkillers if you haven't got a serious injury. So I kept calling my GP and saying, I'm in agony, I can't breathe. He said, well, soft tissue damage can do that, but if they're saying there's no problem, I can't prescribe you morphine or any other pain medication because that would be unethical of me. And I was outraged. I was like, I don't know what to do. I was calling friends, I was calling family. Of course, I couldn't walk, but also I had no support on my foot and my leg either. So, there was no splint, there was no air cast, there was no plaster cast, there was nothing. And I couldn't, and also because of the shock, my digestion was all over the place. My whole body was just a complete mess. I had whiplash, but I didn't know it. I lost feeling in my hands and my arms again, but I didn't know what that was about. So I was just, a complete mess. And I know now from having had the case that I should have been kept in, operated on, done a whole body scan, and kept in for a very long time to treat all of my injuries, rather than just sent home on a whim going, oh, it's fine, So as I say, I had no protection on my foot or my leg, and especially my foot. And I say the foot because obviously getting to the bathroom or to the kitchen to make food or get a drink was agony. I had to plan those trips, because even if my toes so much as brushed the floor, it would start to spasm like this. And I didn't have a clue what that was about. All I knew was that I cannot let any part of this foot touch the floor, because my whole foot and leg would start to shake, hugely. And I didn't know what that was about. And so a couple of times I managed to make the sort of a gargantuan trip it was gargantuan because I was in such agony. Ordinarily it's a 10-minute walk from my flat to the GP surgery. But for me, in those moments, it was hell. So I had to make my way down sort of 6 flights of stairs on my bum, shuffling down, and then try and make my way to the surgery to sort of, to say, look, I'm in agony. What can I do? They didn't do anything. So I took it upon myself to go back to the hospital a few times, at which point they did another X-ray and CT scan and found a few of the breaks, but they said, but we can't assess all the damage till we do an MRI. And they said, well, that's going to take months. So my parents took it upon themselves to drive. I'm from Wales, from Wales to London, carry me into the back of the car and pay for me to have a private scan in Cardiff, where I'm from. At which point the consultant said, your foot is a mess. These are the injuries you've got. And this was 5 weeks down the line. At which point he said, I can't, there's no point sort of pinning it now, it's too late. But the bones have started to heal. And actually you risk more damage now if we try and fix this. So the best thing is just try and live with it, and we can treat it conservatively in the best way we possibly can. So that's really the point that treatment started to happen, and I began to find a bit of closure on at least what had happened physically to me. So I was in Wales then for a further 6 weeks, I think, with my family, recuperating with all the treatment that the hospital in Cardiff had given me. So that was 6 weeks after. So that was 6 weeks plus 5 weeks here. So 3 months after the accident, I was able to come back to London and think about restarting my life. And because I was so traumatized still and in so much pain, I thought the best thing to do would be to sort of push myself back into my old life in an attempt to normalize. But what I didn't realize was that in trying to normalize, I was minimizing. So I threw myself back into my life like a sort of a bodysuit or a pair of trousers, but soon realized that they didn't fit anymore. Like the pieces were all still there, but they didn't fit together in the same way. And that's because of the trauma and the NDE. I was changed, but I didn't know it. So after about 6 months of trying that, I just broke. I literally broke. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was in still a huge amount of pain in my leg and foot, and emotionally and spiritually. And at this point, I'd started to open up a little bit about the NDE, which was about a year after the accident now, to various friends. And they were great. They were really, really, and most of them were artistic anyway. So they were really encouraging. So I was slowly beginning to open the door to what I needed. And, a couple of them said, just stop now, stop. This is the same pattern as before the accident. Just take some time out, stop. You've broken because, and interestingly, because of what was going on before the accident with the glandular fever, and because I've known that I put all these defenses up, I would lie in bed at night crying and just praying and saying, I need to break. I just need to break. And of course, I had in a big way. I obviously wished for it and got it in a big way, in a way that I hadn't ever expected. And so even though I was broken, a year after the accident, it still felt like a better place than the place I was in before the accident, which might sound strange, but it did. I was raw, and I felt like the bus had driven a hole through my heart that everybody could see through. I was so raw, but I was also feeling real and authentic, something that I never felt before. So I started to then open the door to speaking about the trauma, to speaking about what had happened, to speaking about especially the NDE. And it changed everything. And I'm so grateful for friends and family, especially my friends in my autistic community that I work within, because they're very open-minded people. And I chose to speak to a few people who were so loving and warm. And I remember one conversation with a friend that 15 years ago was my mentor in the industry, and we've stayed in touch, and we're very good friends now. And she's actually working on the Burgundy book, which is my current project about the accident, which is a podcast. She's directing me in it, and she lived very close to my previous home where the accident happened. And she called me one day and she said, Renu, I'm going to come to your house. I'm directing a musical cabaret in a drama school. She's a director. And at that point, she was teaching in the drama school as well as directing in the show. She said, I'm directing cabaret this term. I want you to come. There's no obligation for you to make any input into the show. Just come and reconnect to your old life, or to what you do, what you live for. Just come and sit and watch the rehearsals. Just be around your people, musical theatre people. And I was a bit hesitant. And after a couple of phone calls, I just went, yeah, all right, you've got me, I'll come. But I'm not going to make any input because I'm not in the space to be able to work. I know, just have coffee and have a cup of tea and sit and watch. So I did. And that I watched for the whole of the rehearsal process, which was relatively short. And I remember that first night, I went back to her home and she poured me a small glass of wine, and I was just sitting there, wine in my hand, crying, just saying, I feel so lost and traumatized, and I feel like everybody can see through me. I feel hollow, and I had this NDE, and she said, tell me about the NDE. And I told her the whole story, and she put her wine down on the table and she went, Renu, this is your life's work from now on. You're going to make a podcast. It's going to be called The Burgundy Book. I'm going to help you and I will direct it. And at that point I went, oh God, all right. And everything changed because it was the first time I'd felt purposeful since the accident. And I went home that night and I thought, I feel less lost all of a sudden. I still feel traumatized, and all those feelings were still there. And, I'm still adjusting to a life change and an NDE and all that. But suddenly I feel like it's been galvanized by this conversation. So from that moment on, I felt like I've, as you all know, and as Chuck knows, worked really hard to completely reinvent myself by integrating this into my work, because this now, everything I do, I feel like goes through the filter of my NDE, every single thing I do. And as a result, I feel like magic infuses my life so frequently, a feeling I never thought I'd have, and words I never thought I'd say before the accident, because I'm now in touch with that space constantly, because I want to be and I allow myself to be. So like I say, all the choices I make come through the filter of my NDE and that love. So I've spoken for a very long time. I think I'll pause to give myself and you guys a bit of time to assimilate.